All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the presentation, Cybersecurity and Downtime Risk, How to Win Your Board's Confidence. Today's webinar is a joint effort from Interbit Data and Thrivewell Tech. Before we get going, just a couple brief housekeeping items. First, all participants have been placed on mute as the default setting. Secondly, attendees are unable to see other attendees in the meeting. And last but not least, we encourage you to ask a question or provide feedback. You can do that using either the Q&A or the chat functions on the right-hand sidebar of your WebEx window. You can enter a comment or ask a question at any time today, but we will be holding off on Q&A until the end of the presentation. And with that, I would like to introduce today's presenters. Paul Steineken is the CTO of Thrivewell Tech, an advanced managed service provider of information technology to hospitals and senior living facilities. Paul has spent decades as a C-level strategist for large acute care health systems. He developed one of the first health information exchanges, and he also worked for NASA designing control systems for the International Space Station that operate through connected devices. Our other presenter today is Arthur Young. He's the founder and CEO of Interbit Data, which provides business continuity and information distribution solutions to hospitals. Arthur formerly worked for Meditech. He's been a healthcare entrepreneur since 1997. Arthur holds master's degrees in both social work and business administration. He's an expert in helping health systems solve problems, maintain clinical and business continuity, and become more efficient. And with that, I will hand it over to Arthur for his introductory comments.
Thank you very much, Sven, and thank you everybody for attending. And I just wanted to start out with an overview of some of the things we're going to talk about today. You know, we're going to try to give you some key takeaways. You know, what should you be doing? You know, what can we learn from real world events? You know, what is the steps to creating a secure posture? But one of the things we're going to start talking about is just downtimes and what the impact overall of downtimes are, and you know, why in the world is all of this stuff happening today. I'm going to, Paul and I will share responsibilities for speaking, and we will allow some time at the end so that we can be sure to answer any questions that you have. The next slide.
Actually, I was going to say, Paul, would you like to
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
say hello here real quick?
Sure. Sure. What you'll also be learning today is not only the kind of the lessons learned from a case study, but we'll also be talking about what are the types of protections you need, what are the minimal kind of requirements for protection of cyber, giving you that recommendation based upon real world events. Really focusing in on the fact that with this, we both have experience in these areas, and that we can share real experiences with you guys to make sure that you get value from this. Over.
All right. And before we get going, we've got a little audience poll question.
Yeah.
Which is, what is the estimated cost of ransomware attacks against hospitals in 2020? And you see 4 different choices there. I'll leave this open for 30 seconds or so to get your voting.
Vote early and vote often.
That's right. Okay, just a few more seconds. All right, and half of you had the right answer, $21 billion.
I am impressed. So, yes, as half of you saw, it's $21 billion just last year is the estimated cost of ransomware attacks against hospitals. Certainly, ransomware overall has been occupying a lot of news, not just healthcare, but healthcare is, in fact, a particularly rich source. And it's one of the reasons why there have been a lot of ransomware attacks in the industry. Next, really, it's one of the things that was identified is in surveying the marketplace, Synergist Tech found that only about 44% of healthcare providers are following the standards that are set up, regarding cybersecurity. And even that 44%, that includes a large assortment of entities, but it's certainly a challenge, and we'll be talking more about that. Next. Before we start focusing on cybersecurity, we got to look at what the impact of a lot of these problems are, other than the financial, but really the business we're in is taking care of patients. And so, for a long time we've had, we expect some level of planned downtimes related to system upgrades or updates, things like that. And then there have always been that number of downtimes. Maybe it's the upgrade that took too long that goes into an unplanned downtime, or somebody breaks a cable and a wing of the hospital is disconnected, or the power goes out, or something like that. And those two are things that have created downtimes and have challenged the hospital, the healthcare entity, to try to continue to do work. And as we've gotten more automated systems, we need to be able to provide access to information that otherwise they would be getting from the computer system. And that's in fact where Interbit Data's NetSafe application comes in, because we ensure that information is going to be available to the clinicians and for the patients where the clinicians or the patients are located. And that goes for also disaster, natural disasters or other types of disasters. You can't anticipate it, but in fact, you still have the same need to have that information. The complication arises now with cybercrime that the things that we used to do, basically keeping a lot of copies, or like even NetSafe does, is provide copies of information on local devices. Well, that just falls by the wayside in a ransomware attack, for instance, when that PC that you rely on has actually just become a paperweight because the system is locked. You can't get into it. You're challenged to, deal with the ransomware. And that's why we recently came up with another solution that's hardened against the threats of ransomware and the steps we would take to disable networks and all of that in order to deal with cyber attacks. And we have a special version of NetSafe called CyberVault that basically ensures that you'll have that information and it's actually protected from your network. Because as much as we talk about the cause of a downtime, if you go to the next slide, the fact of the matter is your users don't care what the cause is, because the impact to them is all the same. a downtime to them is when they can't get to the information that they need when they need it. And that is essentially to provide patient care. And so, our NetSafe product line is designed to address that issue of downtime. But now let's continue and talk about the next slide.
Actually, Arthur, we've got one
Oh,
more.
I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. We've got one more polling question to ask you. This is a simple yes or no answer. Is your staff trained each year on cybersecurity preparation? Is your staff trained each year on cybersecurity?
It's a very important question.
Okay, just 5 more seconds. All right. Pretty evenly split between yes, no, and unsure, almost a third each. So very interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. So let's talk about this, and I'm going to ask Paul to join in. The question is, why is this happening? Paul, what can you tell us about that?
Well, in general, of course, cybercrime has been occurring for a long time since people realized they could make money at cybercrime. What's happened recently is with the COVID effects, with kind of the explosion of the workforce out of a protected environment, outside that not naturally protected environment, that the criminals are saying, wow, we can go after, target other areas. And also they're kind of, if you see the cyber criminals, they kind of work through what they can get the most money on. And they're also coming down towards smaller entities, the smaller hospitals, smaller systems, and attempting to go down the line and get those types of clients. Also, very interestingly, the way this kind of works, think of it as a buyer-seller market in the criminal world. An entity goes out and tries to seed, break through your walls, and put hidden code inside the walls, and they can't be detected by the virus detection, and then kind of goes in the marketplace and says, well, does anybody want to hack this thing? And they'll sell that hackability, and then somebody else will take it and hack it and run out and see how much money they can make through cybercrime. So it's just the maturing of this criminal enterprise and the fact that they're going down deeper into into attacking folks. And also, of course, healthcare information is worth money. General rule of thumb is it's worth about $10 per record. Really, of course, one record's really not worth $10, but if you aggregate them all together and get a bundle of it, it is worth that kind of money.
Well, yep. I've heard that a credit card is worth about $1 on the market. So it's like 10 times what a credit card might be worth, which is hard to imagine.
Yes, it is, and it's really around the preciousness of that data to really understand and be used in different ways. It has a lot of value in the open market space. Healthcare data is hard to aggregate and pull together, so if you can get a bundle of it, you can sell it. That's the way it comes down to it.
Well, the other thing is that we're sort of opening ourselves up for vulnerabilities because of all the challenges we already have. I mean, one thing that's been happening is, the healthcare system is looking at teams in terms of collaboration to provide care, and that means opening information and sharing information, between everybody, and that then introduces another level of concern,
And also there's also a natural maturation and spend associated with technology that is kind of flows down into different entities based upon their financial status, and that means that you often have inside of your environment fragmented technology systems, kind of aging technologies, and once somebody gets inside, they can take advantage of that. So it's really important to protect your outsides to make sure that you can. At the first step, you can make sure that your insides are not as vulnerable, because we all have aging technology inside of our systems that we need to protect.
Well, talking about that, let's go to the next slide, because when you look at your environment, I mean, you can talk to this about.
Sure. Yeah, this is a real world example, obviously, that we well, obviously can't share who it is, but when you do these type of vulnerability scans, you find a lot of problems. And this is not a poorly run organization we're talking about here. This is an organization that's professionally run and takes security seriously. But what happens over time is that you get older systems, older operating systems. You have systems that are difficult to patch. They're forced to be in place because of the technology they're running was only certified on that type of technology, and you get a whole list of vulnerabilities. And so, right here you have 149 critical vulnerabilities. 20 of those are unique, so you need to solve 20 unique problems to solve those critical pieces. And this is a lot of work. This could take a year to go through this piece, more than a year to go through this piece and fix. And so it's really critical to keep up on these types of things. And I guarantee every organization has some number of critical, high, medium, and low vulnerabilities right now. It's just not possible not to have those, right?
Well, it's interesting too, because as much as you need expertise to be able to dig into all of this, my understanding is on the dark web, the bad guys can actually buy tools to exploit these things, right?
They absolutely buy tools. They buy tools to exploit these. And in fact, part of a penetration test, this is a vulnerability test, but part of a penetration test that we do is to go out and look on the dark web. And literally, we go out and we'll take your roles we'll take a look at your domain, and we'll do a search for domains and say, oh, these are the 25 folks that have email addresses in your domain. And I promise you, we went out and searched right now, we would find your organization's domain with a user's name attached to it and a credentials attached to it. It's all dead. It's not being used, but it floats out there. Almost every domain has already had collective vulnerabilities that, because of good practices, are hidden, but they're out there. This is the way the world is. You should assume that you've already got your domain credentials out there in the dark web, because they most of the time are. Right?
Yeah. Well, let's go to the next slide, because talking about what does this really mean? I mean, there's a lot of stuff to be scary about. Yeah.
If you have a social engineering, it's just a typical way. In other words, somebody steals credentials and gets inside of your network and successfully gets into that delicate center that we showed by the vulnerability test, gets inside there and finds some other vulnerabilities and able to send their code around and actually get to the point you have a cyber attack. It is very impactful. What happens when you get a cyber attack that's being successfully executed, the first thing the responders do is shut off the internet. It's done. You cut off the internet. The next thing you do is you basically start isolating systems, put yellow tape around all the systems. So you'll put yellow tape around the email system, yellow tape around the EMR, and you'll isolate those. And then once you've done all that, you have to kind of go back in and take a look at the where that cyber attack has occurred, and et cetera. And you have a lot of work time to do that. So it impacts workflows. On the internet, a lot of cloud vendors can't be accessed, right? Then of course you have financial ramifications. Are you going to pay the ransom or not pay the ransom? Do you have cyber insurance? Hopefully everybody has it, or not, but you execute on that. Then all of a sudden it gets out that you've been hacked, and everybody knows the stories. I don't need to repeat them, but your name gets in that negative column of being hacked, and it gets broadcast, and all the things associated with that. So it's not only the impact of workflow; it's the impact on your brand also.
Yeah. Let's go to the next slide, because a lot of times, these are, the way that people attack the problem, as I say, is they look at the cause. Okay, so let's attack this with this and this with this. I mean, what do you think?
I mean, hospitals hopefully all have firewalls, and firewalls but firewalls, just because you have a firewall does not mean it's set up such that it actually protects you, right? Quite often folks get firewalls, they put them in, they do the minimal changes to it. Hopefully they change the admin password from what it came shipped as, and they let it run, right? Firewalls need attention. They need a professional to look at it and continually look at it and continually understand how it's and update how it's being used for screening. There's a lot of interactions between the firewall and the external world's trusted parties to make sure that you're appropriately protecting yourself that needs to be enabled and managed. So You have firewalls, antivirus, everybody has antivirus, but today's antivirus is not yesterday's antivirus. Today's antivirus is much more aggressive. So there's companies out there that are fresh to the antivirus world, that take a new role, they get much more participatory. So the antivirus tool we use, they literally will call you up if they think something's going on. They'll literally pick the phone up and call up at 4 o'clock in the morning and say, it looks like something might be going on. So it's not just, you get an email message hidden in your email, you get a human being calls you. And so that's there, but also people do these paper printouts and redundancy backup systems and cloud backups. Those are important, but often we find that the backups have never been exercised. No one knows if it actually works.
Right.
They've never tried it. And so you say you got a backup, but you don't know what functions. And are you protecting it? Because the first thing a cyber criminal does is go for that backup. If I hit that backup, I've got you. Because you can't recover. I've got you. And so you could also have been,
you could also have been backing up the problem itself. I mean, as part of
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's talk about the next step. So what should you be looking at and thinking about?
Yep. We call it IT hygiene, which, how clean is your IT? How clean from cyber criminals are you? And I like to talk about it as a top-down, bottom-up type of approach that everyone should take. Let's start with the top. The top is policies and how you address cybersecurity. They need to be documented. They need to be part of your workforce. It needs to be reviewed every year. It needs to be part and parcel of your entire culture. And that's why we asked the question about the cyber training earlier. So policies need to be established. They need to be maintained. This should be a topic that's always discussed in any compliance meeting. IT needs to have a seat at the table for compliance meetings. They need to be held responsible for building a tightly clean IT environment. So once you get the policies in place, you got to do something with them, right? So you got the paper. Once you got the paper, you got to, okay, how am I going to do it? How am I going to make sure my password is 15 characters long, or a passphrase, I should say, is 15 characters long? How am I going to make sure that I'm monitoring the network? How am I going to make sure that I know if somebody's going to come in and hack me? And so you got to put the physical protections against it, right? And then for the physical protections, you got to take a look at your users and apps and make sure that they're appropriately secured. And you know where all your EPHI is, and you know where it's stored, and you know if it's easy to get into, is it appropriately encrypted, et cetera. And then from the bottom up, you got to take a look at it from an IT point of view. Do I have the tools in place to actually do all this protection? Do I have the tools that can let me know who's on the network? And do I have tools that I can look at my logs, which are basically applications, write out what's happening to them? And so if you take a top-down, bottom-up approach, then you meet in the middle with kind of an action plan. And that action plan continually should be worked on every year. It changes every year. This is not something you do once. You just keep doing it year after year after year. Yep.
That's part of the challenge here, is that it's not, it's not just building the foundation. There's a flow that happens. It has to be examined and updated continually, because nobody is resting on their laurels. There's new challenges. And as we asked about the question with your users, I mean, your users represent, I don't know if I want to say the largest vulnerability, but the largest challenge, because inadvertently, they can actually allow a lot of things to happen.
That's exactly right. And phishing is commonly what everybody hears. And phishing is something that can be protected. And phishing is protected by education. That's really what has to be, how it's protected. You educate your staff on what phishing means, and you continually enforce it. That's the primary protection against phishing.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the next slide, like an example of what really happened out there. What kind of a situation was it, and what were the steps? What had to happen?
So we were called in to help with a ransom event. We were helping a client to begin to address their security concerns, and we'd installed some software in there as kind of the first step. Let's put good software out there to protect you, right? This is easy to do. It's just one. It just deploys to desktops very easily. And it happened. This is I talked to one of the modern virus detection systems, and we deployed it. And within a month after we deployed it, we got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. There's attack, right? There's a cyber attack going on. And so what happens when you get that call in the morning, or you find out that the worst thing that can happen is that all of a sudden you look at your laptop and it says, literally what happens is when you get attacked, a text box comes up and says, you have been ransomed. This is the website you need to go to. This is about money. We want money. And if you don't pay us, we will not unlock your environment. We will not do it. We will not set you free. And if that happens, then you've absolutely been hacked. But what happened in this case is that we were able to come in and go, okay, let's again, shut down the internet, right? Isolate the problem. And then basically we come in and do isolate the environment, start doing deep scans of devices to see where they are, and immediately make everybody force password reset, right? Everybody has to reset the password. So everybody's password just goes away and has to be reset. And the next step after that is really to talk to your cyber insurance folks, right? That's really what we need to get to, is to talk to the cyber insurance. And so, so what happens is you get attacked, you realize you're being attacked, then you go, the first step is go talk to your cyber insurance folks. When you talk to your cyber insurance folks and you activate it, what happens is they come in and they go, okay, go talk to these attorneys. They're on our panel. And you call up those attorneys, and the attorney goes, okay, I'm your quarterback now. Here's your statement of work. You sign it, right? And that statement of work is signed, and they lead you through the whole process. And the first thing they're going to do is say, we need to get a forensics team on board, right? And then the forensics team gets picked out from the insurance group, and the forensics team comes on board. And the next thing they'll say is, you need to have, if you don't have the capabilities to recover yourself, you need to hire somebody to go in and recover for you, right? And that's the third. So there's like 3 statements of work associated with this. And from the insurers, that's what the insurers cover. And then the hard process then is basically continue isolating, continue examining your environment, take a look at what's been encrypted, because what happens with these cyber criminals is they put in a piece of code that goes into key servers like your backup and encrypts it. So it's a brick. As you said, Arthur, it's just a brick. You can't use it. It's been totally encrypted. And you take a look at those, and you got to make a decision. Should I recover it, or should I not recover it? Right? Should I pay the ransom? My basic philosophy is never pay the ransom, but it's up to the client whether they pay the ransom.
Well, and I'm hearing more and more that some states are putting laws in place about that. I guess you told me something about sort of based on the cause, or
basically what happens is that, because we, in this incident, we filed a report with the FBI because the client wanted to and thought it was appropriate. And what the FBI tells us is that this is a criminal, and as a criminal, it's up to you to pay the ransom or not. If it was a state sponsored, they determined this is a state sponsored terrorist. In other words, a country was sponsoring directly this group to attack your facility. No, you could not pay the ransom, right? You're not supposed to, because that's a terrorist activity. And then states are getting more prescriptive. They're starting to define different things also. But in general, I don't see the need to pay the ransom if forbid that you get this, because you can't trust them, right? So the only reason you have to pay the ransom is if there's no way you can recover in a reasonable time, and it's materially damaged your business so much that you're losing so much money that you're going to be materially damaged that you have to recover.
But as you say, you can't trust them to deliver necessarily.
Well, it's interesting. There are criminals out there, organizations, and there's various organizations. You can get a pie chart that tells you what the big ones are, and the big ones do give you the encryption key, and they do work because that's how they got big, is they pay the ransom. But what you can't trust them on is them giving your data back. That's what happens. You can't trust them on giving the data back. Okay. So in the end, what happens is you basically go through this process, and at the end, you come out with a list of people who you need to identify as having data stolen from them, and you recover all your systems. And it can take a month. It could take 2 months. It could take a while to recover from this event.
Yeah. Wow. That's scary. So, based on those kinds of circumstances, what is the new approach to, ensuring that your environment is protected?
What's emerging is from the NIST organization, which is a standards body, NIST has these things called controls, and the controls are basically, do you have control of different portions of your network? And there's 20 typical controls you examine. And that's the way it's been done for decades. For decades, it's been done by, let's take a look at your controls and see if you've got the appropriate controls. They're now beginning to say, that's not enough. We need to put in this idea of zero trust. And the zero trust is what we had on the previous slide. And that means you just don't trust anybody in your network. And to not trust anybody, you don't have anybody you trust on your network. And what that means is when you come in your network, even with your credentials, you look at the behavior of the people in the network and you see, are they behaving the way they should? And if they're not behaving the way they should, you cut them off, right? So you're not trusting anyone. You're examining what their typical behaviors are. And it's not just you get in, you do anything you want to. You examine them and say, oh, now that's coming from, that's coming from Georgia, and most of our workers are in California. Why is that coming from Georgia? Let's turn that off. Right.
Well, and that's, I mean, it used to be that a new person joins the company and they got access to everything, and basically you were worried about protecting particular assets, but in general they could get anywhere they wanted. And now you're saying only give them access to what they need to get to. It's like the security model, really. Yeah,
and look at their behavior and keep a record of their behavior, right? And understand that behaviors and when something looks strange. So it's an ongoing process of continually examine who's using what and why they're using it that you put in place. And it is definitely a different approach from what we always say is that, what a traditional approach is you put a hardened shell around all your assets and make that as hard as it possible. But once you're inside, you do whatever you want to, kind of layers of security like you got here. But then what we're finding out now is that the hardened shell is not enough. We need to harden the interior, and then we need to make it hard. We need to understand who's doing what inside of our interior. That's what this is all about. Right?
The next slide, I mean, I think diagrams some of, the interactions there, and the.
These are all the kind of tools. This slide's purpose is to show you how complex this stuff gets. There's lots and lots of tools that are hidden behind the scenes that IT is responsible for. MFA is multi-factor authentication. Everybody should have that. Most people don't, right? Content security is around making sure that you protect, make sure folks aren't going to websites that you could get a vulnerability from. Endpoint protection is making sure that the devices have virus protection on them and you know what's going on with it. And you can go around the circle. We'll talk about firewalls. We've got the CyberVault piece is another protection to make sure that your documents are safe and you can get to the documents when you want to get to those documents. And then you have phishing education, et cetera. So there's a whole collection of technology that's out there for making sure that you're secure. And most folks, I guarantee almost everybody doesn't have all these. Most people can't afford all of these. So it's about understanding where you want to have your investment and get your most bang for your buck.
Well, that's it. I mean, this is a very complex thing, how, you need expertise to help guide people through this whole process.
You need expertise. And so, for example, things like the micro segment thing down there, it's kind of tech speak, but what happens is, we need to take your network and divide it into little bits such that we know if you go, for example, if you're a nurse or clinician and you're inside of the area that does nursing and caregiving, that's a little micro segment in your world, and you have to do multi-factor authentication in that world once every so often to make sure who you are. But if you go outside of that segment and go to the finance department, you have to re-authenticate. You have to say, I am who I am outside. So you start micro-segmenting things such you have to re-authenticate as a multi-factor authentication as you move around the organization, because you shouldn't be outside potentially, or we definitely don't want to let somebody from the outside come in and bring their credentials into the clinician environment. They need to authenticate when they come in. So the clinical environment is a special environment that needs to be protected because that's where most of the PHI is, right?
But the users, they're not always happy with all that authentication.
No, they're not. And this is the magic. This is always the compromise. How much do you have to authenticate or not? Usually what happens is organizations, they'll say, once so often, every so often, you need to do inside the network. You need to do your multi-factor authentication. You always have to do it outside. Whenever you're going from outside in, you always have to do multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
But when you're inside, it's every so often, and that every so often is dependent upon every organization. Is every week, is every month. You know, it's dependent upon how much tolerance your users have for having to go through another step to log in. Right.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that you know, I've been impressed by the VPN that we use at Interbit, because it actually first does a check of the client device to make sure there are no viruses or anything before it will even allow it to connect up to, you know, the network, and something like that. I mean, I know that not all VPNs have that. It's a great kind of thing. It just makes it that much more foolproof for people and easy to.
Yeah. And another strategy is to go totally away from VPNs and have a thin client that's projected over the internet. Many hospital organizations just say, if you're coming in, you've got to go through a virtual desktop. I'm not naming any vendors, but there's a virtual desktop. Yeah. And that's the only way to get in. You have to come into the virtual desktop, or you can't get in.
And so you're not sharing anything that you have on your side. It's only, you're just looking at the stuff that's on the inside. Yeah.
And that's a highly protected, highly secure environment you're getting into, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about, let's go to the next slide, and we can sort of summarize some of these ideas.
Sure.
Like, what are the key takeaways here?
Well, I mean, first off, it's very important for anyone from a board point of view. So these are kind of board takeaways, which we've told to you guys. So, you know, kind of what you can say to your board is, it's very important for the board and all leaders to understand there isn't a silver bullet. You're not going to be perfect. You're always vulnerable. No matter how much money you spend, you're always vulnerable. And so if you're partnering with someone to provide cybersecurity, if they tell you they're going to guarantee that you're not going to get hacked, you shouldn't trust them, because that's just not accurate. You can't prevent people from being socially engineered. It's just not possible, right? You can't prevent people from being socially engineered. So you're always going to have that vulnerability, no matter how hard it is. And as we just discussed, there's always compromises on how difficult it is to get into your network versus your workflow. And you got to make compromises on that stuff. Right? So first and foremost is, you expect to get hacked and adopt that culture of paranoia, right? So, which means everybody needs to be suspicious of any links on emails. They need to be just continually educated on the fact that don't trust anything. Don't trust anything that's out there, right? It's kind of the zero trust for the user.
And smarter. I mean, they're really, their ability to look like something that is legitimate, it just keeps increasing, you know, and you got to really be careful about looking at what that source email address is or stuff like that.
I mean, I've seen in our user groups, we've had exactly duplicated emails from the signature line. It looks exactly like it's sent in there, and the messages, because there was a social engineering, it was sent internally to the domain. So it looks exactly like an email. It's sent internally from the domain, and you know, and it of course comes from somebody who can authorize a spend, and you got to develop the culture where everybody knows, I will never ask you to spend money online, right? You will always, I will never tell you to authorize a spend online, so that you never trust that, because that's also socially engineered. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, then I talk about the know the top cybersecurity vulnerabilities, right? So phishing, social engineering, right? That's the top thing. You make sure you address that. Multi-factor authentication, make sure you can address that, right?
Yeah.
Make sure that you have good backups. Make sure that you know how to protect your documents. Make sure that if you have backups, that you exercise them, that you do a tabletop. Every year, you got to exercise it. You got to make sure it will work. And you should really seriously think about disaster recovery, because what happens, like you talked about, Arthur, is that the backups could get corrupted. But if you have a disaster recovery piece, you can go back in time. You can literally go back in time and recover. You got timestamps all the way back to where you can get. So you can recover much faster with a disaster recovery method than you can with a backup. Right? So it's an ultimate protection as DR.
But I think also that one of the things they're talking about is, you know, to train your users on because they're the ones who are going to need to keep running things. So yeah, so one of the importance of testing this out is actually not just to do it in IT, but to actually do it throughout the organization to test things.
Absolutely. And of course, the thing that everybody drives everybody crazy is passwords.
Yep.
Unfortunately, we need to all understand that that we're going to move from passwords to passphrases, and passphrases will be 30 characters long, right? It could be, so you're going to need to remember a sentence, basically, is what it'll come down to it, and a sentence with special characters injected. Yeah. And, that becomes very hard. And organizations really are struggling with this number of passwords they have to remember. Single sign-on, therefore, becomes important. But as soon as you do single sign-on, the passphrase has to be much bigger, because once you get the sign-in, you're in, right? So there's all these complexities associated with making sure that the credentials are protected. So your board should understand that, that's always going to happen, that passwords are going to change, et cetera. And so the kind of the education of the board is there'd be uncomfortable things that we're going to execute that people will complain about to do security, multi-factor authentication, long passwords, and we're just going to do them, right? Simple as that, right?
And you've mentioned also several times about the whole issue of cybersecurity. I've had cybersecurity for cybersecurity insurance, excuse me. I've had insurance for a long time, but recently they've been becoming they're asking a lot more questions, aside from raising the price too, but they're asking a lot more questions, and they seem to be getting smarter because, it's important stuff to have, but they're getting more cautious.
I can tell you, I've had deep conversations with our insurance broker, and we're partners with them as far as making sure we get good insurance, and they do all of our insurance. And they've educated me that when the cyber insurance folks first got on board, they didn't know what they're insuring, and so the costs were very low, right? And so, for a small organization, say 300 employees or so, cyber insurance could have been $5,000, $4,000. Wow. Nothing, right? Nothing, right? It was tiny, and they never asked any questions. They just signed it. So it's gone from that to now that same sort of organization, it'll be 5 to 10 times more expensive for cyber insurance. And they will absolutely come to you and say, do you have X? And you'll probably say, no, I don't have X. And they'll say, you can't be insured until you have X, right? And they'll all potentially, I've had one client who the insurer actually hired a penetration test person to come in and see if they could hack them. And before they would sign insurance. So cyber insurance is a must, an absolute must. You must have cyber insurance. Do not scrimp on it. Make sure you have it. But unfortunately, it's also going to force a spend that you may not have anticipated, because they're not going to insure people without validating. Think of it as life insurance. You have to sign off that you've got this quality, that this is your state of health. If you lie about it, you're not covered. Right? Yeah. So the same thing is going to happen with cyber insurance, right? Yeah.
Well, I guess the next stuff is also, positioning yourself. How do you get started? How do you, where do you start?
Yes, like I said, the board, we should tell their board that we need to do a thorough examination of where we are now. Right. So you should not assume that you're good, right? You should assume you're bad, and go into expecting a bad report card. And you need to hire someone, or if you got the capabilities in house, you can do what you can in house. But preferably, you'd have an auditor come in and look at it from the top down. They would look at your policies from a HIPAA point of view. They'd say, "Are you HIPAA compliant? Are you? How do you do on NIST?" And they give you a scorecard, and they give you a plan of action. And there's plenty of firms that do that. They come in and look at it from the top down, and look at that portion of it. And they'll come back with a report card and give you a plan of action to get yourself to the point where your policies are aligned and your processes are aligned and all that. And then you need to hire someone to come out and do a bottom up, which is a penetration test and a vulnerability test, and give you that list and understand what that is. And then once you get those two things, you'll have a collection of areas you have to work on it. And then it's a matter of setting up the processes to continually iterate on that every year, and repeat it every year, and make sure it's done. And so the message to the board is, I need to set this. Need to get a baseline. I need to get a baseline.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and also you need to have access to those experts. That it's not
Yep.
that you can do a bunch of things in-house. You can position yourself so that you have the right team, the right policies and procedures, but it's so dynamic. You need to have access to, that expertise outside. And
absolutely.
yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And what happens is that, these are expensive people.
Yeah.
Security people are frighteningly expensive. It's better to partner with somebody to help out potentially. It's according to your size. I often get asked the question, should I have a CISO or not? What do I need to have online? And the important thing with the CISO is you need to have the CISO role covered.
Yeah.
So the CISO, the things the CISO does needs to be covered, either through partnerships, leasing as part-time CISO. But there's two critical things with the CISO piece is that, number one, the person responsible for security needs to have a direct line to the CEO, right? Direct line to the CEO, so that they are able to go to the CEO and tell them the ugly truth and to be able to understand what's going on. And it's that kind of a thing. That's why there is a CISO, is because it allows that person to have a direct line to the CEO. And if you don't have a CISO, then whomever is responsible for IT security needs to be able to do that kind of reporting relationship. Otherwise, you get a mix. And it's really hard for smaller organizations because you have a small organization, and I've got an IT director, and if I have the IT director is a security person, they're kind of watching themselves, right?
Yeah.
So I'd like to have an external person, but I really can't afford an external. So it's this complex environment that needs to get navigated for reporting structures. But that's the key piece, is that governance piece is put in place, right?
Yeah. But before we move on to questions, I'm just going to emphasize one more time the importance of your users and making sure, well, first of all, multi-factor authentication is, a relatively low-cost tool that really improves your overall posture with, access to that information and protecting your users. And the other thing is training and testing your users, because the whole thing about phishing is, you investigate, and it's just a large percentage of these events will start out with some sort of a social engineering phishing or something like that through your users, and you gotta teach them. You gotta help them to have that paranoia as second nature.
Yep. And on the case study I mentioned, that was how they got in, is through getting credentials from an external agency, and that's how they got in to get inside. Exactly right.
Yeah. So let's open up the floor. If we have any questions that have come up.
Yeah, thank you, Paul and Arthur. As a reminder to our attendees, you can use the Q&A field in the right-hand sidebar of your WebEx window to ask a question of one or both of our presenters today. Paul, I think this is a good one for you to start off with. Wondered if you could summarize, the most important immediate steps to take if you're hacked and you are, the victim of a cyber attack.
The first thing is to isolate yourself from the internet, because what happens is when you're getting hacked is they're really after not only encryption, which happens very quickly, but they're after getting data, and they want a lot of data. And getting data out of your system takes a long time because we're talking about a lot of data. So the faster you cut that, the more you're protected. And the ultimate goal if you're being hacked is to keep yourself from getting above the magic 500 number, where the 500 number is if you have 500 unique individuals EPHI stolen, you'll probably get investigated by the ONC. More than likely. So the faster you turn that thing off, the less likely you are to have that much data. So you can't be shy. And it's hard because you're sitting there, and you're going, I don't want to turn the internet off. I just don't want to do it. That's why the speed is important. You need to understand you're getting hacked. If you are, the switch goes off. I'm sorry, the switch is off. Right? We'll fix it afterwards. That's the number one thing that has to happen. And the number two thing, once you do that, is to take a deep breath and then take a look at and validate that you've had an attack. Obviously, turn the internet off, you've kind of got the good idea about it, but you might want to jump ahead if it looks very seriously. Go back and validate how deep it is, what the depth of the penetration is. And if you can't do that, call your cyber insurance, right? Initiate that process, because they'll lead you through all of it, right? If you don't have the staff on hand that you think can really go do that quickly and understand what's happened, it's call cyber insurance. And I promise you, once you get that attorney on board, they will lead you through the process, and you will not be lost. They are professionals at this. They'll do a very good job once you initiate it. Yep.
All right. As a reminder, you can ask a question using the Q&A window. Another question, wonder if you could offer tips for where to start with training your staff to be more vigilant on cybersecurity issues.
Sure, I can jump in.
Yeah, please.
The key with the training for cyber insurance issues is to not make it just this once a year thing you do, just to say check the box, you do it. That's really what it comes down to. Because mostly it's been, I'll take the cyber training thing every year as a part of it. I do HIPAA training, I do cyber training, I do I do all the other training we do, and I just kind of just get done with it. We really need to do ad hoc, anytime, forced observation and forced training, and you do that. There's lots of tools out there that do this. That let you do fake phishing attacks and fake link attacks and all that kind of stuff. And they're not that ridiculously expensive. And if you do that, then you can make sure that your staff has been appropriately educated, and that you've done what you need to do to make sure it's continually in the top of mind. Now, Arthur, you have others?
Yeah, no, it's just identifying the gaps. I mean, that's what we need to do. Is it needs to become second nature to people.
Mm-hmm. One other question I noticed on the key takeaways, there was an item that we didn't get to about knowing what to look for in a business partner. Arthur, do you want to start on that one?
Well, you have two of them here. No. Well, again, it's looking for to supplement your own expertise. It's somebody who is recognized, who can provide the credentials and experience that they understand both the the threats, the environment, the cybersecurity environment, but also your business. I mean, healthcare has many unique aspects, and it really is important to partner with people who understand the healthcare environment. Paul,
I agree with that. That's probably, obviously you need to have someone who has experience and has been there, done that, knows what's going on, can take you through, lead you appropriately to make sure you put the best security posture forward that you're able to put forward.
Yeah.
That's your goal. And everybody's a little bit different based upon their finances and what their business is. But we're all in healthcare. If you don't speak the healthcare language, you've got one arm tied behind your back. You really,
absolutely.
And you'll have a hard time. You'll have a hard time helping the users understand why this is necessary if you can't speak the language. And ultimately, users need to adopt it.
You mentioned that there are necessarily some compromises, and those compromises are rationalized through understanding the business we're in. I mean, it's important.
Arthur, one final question for you about downtimes. When you've suffered a cyber attack and there's no access to EHR and all the other expensive technology that hospitals have in place, what are the best practices for your clinical staff as far as patient care goes? What should they be doing?
Basically what you want to recognize, first of all, is what is the essential information that they need in case of a downtime, so that they can continue to provide care. And then you really need to figure out, hopefully using tools like ours, but a way to preserve that information, make it accessible to the clinicians in a reasonable way. It needs to be timely. And you know, it needs to be protected. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be dynamic because it changes over time. So it's not, it can't be a static type of information. But it always starts out. I'm sorry. Go.
I just, you and I've talked about this. Is also from all this point is document retention, having good policies associated with what you keep, what you don't keep, including emails, making sure you have discipline to do that, because most of my clients are most exposed on their share drive, on that gigantic thing we have where we store infinite information that no one knows what's on it. And you know, that's the first thing a criminal looks at. Where's the share drive? Let me go look at all the directories in the share drive and let me find anything that's foolishly labeled EHR data, right? I'm going to go get that EHR data immediately, right? So that's also part of it, Arthur, is to make sure that you've got good discipline and understand your document environment and what's there.
Well, and also to the point is that, you know, in the event of a cyber attack, to recognize that all of your systems are compromised. So things like forms, things like address books, like how can I call, you know, it's so easy to go into Outlook and to find this information, but if that's not accessible, to make sure that those are some of the things that you're preserving. So, because in that cyber attack, you may not have access to it. You know,
probably won't not have it.
Yeah. So it's important to look beyond the regular downtime to the cyber downtime.
All right, and with that, we are just about out of time here, so we would like to thank you on behalf of everyone at Interbit Data and Thrivewell Tech. Thank you very much for joining us and spending your time with us this afternoon. We hope that it was worth your while, and we hope to see you again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.